I played competitive sports my whole life, and there's many different ways that I see people showing up as the chief executive of an organization. The way I view it is I've been bestowed a responsibility by a group of peers, and the best captains aren't necessarily the best players. They have leadership characteristics to coalesce and make the team perform at an optimal way, but there are superstars on my team that are way better than me at a bunch of different dimensions of being a consultant. And I show up as a captain knowing that I get the privilege to lead a group of peers, but I never forget that I'm serving that group of peers, and that's how I think of the role.
That's Dan Helfrich, the chairman and CEO of Deloitte Consulting. He's been with the company for over 20 years, and he currently leads a team of over 56,000 people. During our discussion, Dan shares how he creates a consistent culture for such a large workforce. Dan is extremely passionate about diversity and inclusion, and today you will hear his suggestions on how to candidly talk about diversity inside of your organization and how he fosters an environment of inclusion for such a large workforce at Deloitte. You will also hear from Dan what makes a truly great leader, how Dan makes tough choices, how he has used empathy in his career, how he gets to know his employees as individuals, and much more.
The absence of humanity will drive irrational and illogical decisions, and will erode the sort of fabric of cultures of organizations. So we have to all love the efficiency and precision and beauty that technology offers in the way we run our businesses and the way we reach our customers. But the way we're describing it is the best organizations elevate the human experience, not just the customer experience, not just the employer experience, but we're going to elevate the human experience. And technology plays a big role in that, but never, ever, ever underestimate or try to substitute the humanity from the situation.
This is Jacob Morgan, best-selling author, speaker, and futurist. Welcome to the Future of Work podcast, where every week I speak with C-level executives, business leaders, and authors to explore how the workplace is changing and what the future of work is going to look like. The goal of this show is to give you the insights, the ideas, and the inspiration to help future-proof your career and your organization. If you want to get access to more content, such as podcast transcriptions and information on working with me or having me keynote your next event, you can visit my website at thefutureorganization.com. If you want to take your education even further by getting access to courses that explore these themes in more depth, then check out futureofworkuniversity.com. Also, if you get a few seconds, please rate and review the podcast on iTunes or whatever your preferred channel is. It really helps the show, and I personally appreciate it, since the podcast does take quite a bit of effort to produce. In case you're interested in sponsoring the podcast or working with me, my email is jacob@thefutureorganization.com. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Future of Work show with Jacob Morgan. My guest today is Dan Helfrich. He's the chairman and CEO of Deloitte Consulting. Dan, thanks for joining me.
Great to be here.
So I have a lot of questions for you, but as usual, for those who listen to the show, I always like to start with background information. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with what you're doing now.
I'm the oldest of 7 kids, and being a part of a big family is a huge part of who I am as a leader, and how I grew up. And then I wanted to be a sportscaster all my life, and then when it came to time to graduate from Georgetown University, I actually was weighing a broadcasting opportunity and a consulting opportunity, and against the recommendations of almost everybody in my life, I decided to try consulting. And like most, I imagined consulting to be a 2 or 3 year venture to gain some variety. And that 2 or 3 years has turned into 20 plus. And has taken me around the country and around the world, doing lots of different things with our clients. And, without ever having the ambition or desire to do so, it lands me with the really cool job to be, the captain and the leader of a great 56,000 person team right now.
Wow, 56,000 people. That's quite a large size organization. And how long have you been at Deloitte?
I've been here for about 21 years.
Wow, you don't hear that very often nowadays, people that have been at an organization for that long. So congratulations.
Yeah, it's been fun. And, my parents would tell you I've always been a very loyal person. And so I'm not one to look around, and if I love what I'm doing and I love the people I'm with, then that's intrinsically motivating for me, and that's been the case.
Very cool. Now, you mentioned you came from a family of 7 other kids, or 7 including you. And I had actually the CEO of Ketchum as a podcast guest fairly recently. And when I was doing the podcast live, somebody asked a really interesting question, which now I want to ask you. And their question was, is there anything that you bring from your personal life as far as how you interact with your family, your siblings, parents, kids, that you bring into work?
Absolutely. You bring respect for people who are very different than you. And that might sound odd coming from talking about a single family, but our single family includes 3 of my siblings who are adopted. That single family includes today 7 people. I'm the only one of which is doing anything remotely like big business. That family has a wide degree of, personality types. And so for me, someone who puts inclusion and diversity at the center of everything I do and how I lead, so much of that has its roots in growing up in my household.
So you're able to bring some of that into your organization. And you mentioned diversity and inclusion, which is a very big theme in a lot of businesses lately. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing there?
Sure. And I actually think some are talking about it as a theme, and I think that's wrong. Diversity and inclusion is an imperative, not a management fad, and not something to pay lip service to. And, what we're doing is we are putting, diversity and inclusion, and I view those as related concepts, but that have distinct elements to them. We're putting that at the center of everything we do. We're striving for increasing the representation of our teams on a ton of dimensions, in terms of gender and in terms of race and in terms of sexual orientation and in terms of veterans and in terms of parents. And we're also, increasing the diversity of our team in terms of things like the types of skills people have, those with highly technical backgrounds, those with design backgrounds, those with cultural anthropology backgrounds, and personality, or what we call business chemistry types. We're talking about diversity from all those angles and putting it at the center of how we form teams. And then inclusion is about making sure that every voice finds its way into the conversation. And those are powerful things that we don't have as, hey, everyone needs to say they're focused on diversity and inclusion, so here's our, part of it. It's truly in our DNA.
I know a lot of organizations really struggle with diversity and inclusion. So how do you make sure that comes to life for your team of 56,000 people? Do you have training on it? Do you have certain scorecards you look at? Or how do you actually foster that environment?
Well, we have both of the things you mentioned. So, a good example of training that we've put all of our leaders through is unconscious bias training. There's some really important lessons you can learn from understand the biases that are present that you're not aware of. Certainly, we are looking at representation from a lot of angles and measuring that quantitatively. But the most important thing to get the concepts of inclusion to stick in an organization is it's prominent in the way you talk about the business. And again, it's not an adjacent or side, it's not an adjacent or side effort. So, I finish, many of my team meetings. Let's say we're having a big quarterly team meeting. I finish the meeting asking 2 questions to the group. 1, how can this team be more diverse? And 2, how can this team be more inclusive? And no matter who you are, no matter if you're in a 20-person organization or a couple 100,000-person organization, or you're the leader of a 5-person team or a 56,000-person team, there is an answer to both of those questions every time. No team is ever diverse enough, and no environment is ever inclusive enough. And so opening the conversation to that set of topics unleashes a whole lot of great thinking and a whole lot of dialogue that creates comfort level in an organization about talking about things like race and talking about things like different ages in the workplace and what that means and what the implications are. And that I have found to be incredibly powerful.
These are usually, very, very hard conversations for a lot of people to have, even leaders to have inside of their companies. Is this a relatively new thing, or is this something that you've done throughout your career?
It's something I've thought about throughout my career, and I would say I have certainly found my voice on the topic over the last 6 to 8 years in a more prominent way. And the conversation, as you suggest, is intimidating to many. And oftentimes people struggle talking about diversity, not because they don't think it's important, but because things like the language and the vocabulary of diversity are intimidating, and people don't want to say or do the wrong thing. And what I've tried to do is be vulnerable with our teams and to talk about language and to talk about diversity in very practical ways, because I hope that's setting an example for what matters. And the other thing I've been very clear on, and that I think is important for all leaders to understand and to be comfortable talking about, is that one can create an incredibly diverse and an incredibly inclusive workplace without ever changing a single standard. Sometimes the way people talk about diversity is it comes across as we're going to change or lower our standards to try to achieve a certain level of representation. The way I view it is we have to create opportunities and pathways for those who are less represented, but we can do so without changing a single standard and keeping the bar in the identical place.
Do you have any suggestions for how to talk about diversity? Because again, whether you're a leader inside of an organization or an employee, how do you, bring it up in a tactful way without, kind of alienating anybody or coming off the wrong way?
You ask questions and are curious about cultures other than your own. So if you have, a big group of people who are celebrating Diwali in the month of October, you ask questions about, hey, what's the roots of Diwali? Why is it 5 days? Why are you celebrating in that particular way? Or maybe you ask someone, an African American, you say, hey, I'd love to understand. I hear some people use the word black, and some people use the expression person of color, and some people use the expression African American. Tell me sort of what your perspective is on that language and how that's come to be and how I should be thinking about it. And being vulnerable and curious about people other than yourself is, in my mind, the best way to open up a conversation that gets comfortable, because people understand that you're seeking to improve yourself and improve your cultural awareness.
I love that. So really, and I guess you mentioned kind of two interesting things there. So one is being vulnerable, so kind of opening up and letting people know that maybe you don't have the best understanding or the clarification, and maybe you need help in that area. And also coming at it from a genuine perspective of, I actually want to know this. I'm legitimately not sure, and I would like your perspective. So I love those two angles of asking questions and being curious. Something anybody can do.
Indeed.
I wanted to shift gears just very slightly and look sort of at the high level. How do you see your role as CEO?
In a word, as captain. There's many, I played competitive sports my whole life, and there's many different ways that I see people showing up as the chief executive of an organization. The way I view it is I've been bestowed a responsibility by a group of peers, and the best captains aren't necessarily the best players. They have leadership characteristics to coalesce and make the team perform at an optimal way. But there are superstars on my team that are way better than me at a bunch of different, a bunch of different dimensions of being a consultant. And I show up as a captain knowing that I get the privilege to lead a group of peers, but I never forget that I'm serving that group of peers, and that's how I think of the role.
Which also takes vulnerability, by the way, to kind of admit that there are people that you're surrounded by who might be able to do things better than you, which is kind of contradictory to how most people have viewed leadership over the past, 50, 100, 150 years. What do you think makes a great leader? So if you wanted to promote somebody inside of Deloitte Consulting, what are the characteristics or qualities that you look for in a successful leader?
Empathy, authenticity, inclusivity, and really effective communicator.
Oh, simple and straightforward. And I like how you have the empathy in there, because that too is something that we don't hear a lot about inside of organizations. And do you guys train for these things as well, like for empathy?
We do. We actually have an entire education program that all of our leaders have to go through called the Art of Empathy.
Wow.
And it's really powerful. And in our business, which is a professional services business serving clients, the art of empathy applies to how you lead within our organization. It also applies to how you create lasting and sustaining relationships with customers.
And what does the training program look like? You said it's a couple days?
It's a couple days, and like any good training program, it's a combination of articles to read and debate. There's scenario-based and practical learning that you get put in some situations, and then what we also hear from, and which I love, is we'll hear from great leaders. Many of whom are former or current clients of ours, many of whom are others that have been in our industry. And, we hear them talk about situations where, in this case, empathy was an incredible asset to someone's success, and in other cases where the absence of empathy drove a situation the wrong way.
Yeah, empathy is... I think another big focus for businesses is how to take somebody else's perspective and see their side. I don't suppose you have any examples or stories of how maybe you have used empathy during your career. Do you have any stories that pop into mind?
Well, I hope I use it 100 different ways every week. But in terms of stories, what I have found, and look, I was the captain of the Georgetown University soccer team as an undergraduate, and the same empathetic practices I used as the captain of that team I use today. And that is that to be empathetic, you have to understand the unique motivations of every player on the team. And some leaders make a big mistake, and that is in thinking that the way to lead is to lead consistently or identically the whole team. The important way to lead, and you can only do this if you have empathy, is to have a consistent set of principles, and fairness, of course, is one that you lead by. But you have to motivate both the group as a whole and the individuals within the group. And that means that I need to know who's having a difficult time at home, whose parents are ill, who's going through a difficult time in a relationship, who is stressed because they're getting pulled on from two or three different clients at the same time, who's incredibly excited because the team that they support just won some big game. Being able to understand all those things and therefore empathize with the individuals helps you simultaneously lead an entire team, but also bring each individual along the way.
So in other words, if you, so when you're leading a certain group of people, you don't necessarily take the exact same approach with everyone, which is actually what I think most leaders do. They take the same, like, whatever principles that they have, and it's just kind of cookie cutter, copy and paste from one person to the other. But what you're talking about is, you have to get to know your employees as individuals, as human beings, and not just as workers. And I suspect that that's probably uncomfortable for a lot of leaders. So how did you go about doing that?
Look, some of it is this is just classic nature nurture thing. Some of it is natural based on, my upbringing and who I am. But we do things both for ourselves and with clients that I think are really practical. For example, we employ a training around the topic of business chemistry, and you go through some assessments and identify whether someone is a driver, a guardian, a pioneer, or an integrator as their primary business persona. And then you role play and scenario. Look, if you're managing and leading a team with this mix of guardians, pioneers, integrators, and drivers, then the way you're going to need to motivate the team and the individuals is X. And if the team looks like this, it's Y. And so those are some practical things that have unlocked greater comfort in clients that I advise and greater comfort in leaders within Deloitte to not just apply the same cookie cutter approach to every situation or every person.
I'm not sure if you would agree with this, but I'm curious to hear your perspective. At least one of the things that I think, and I hope we're going to see, is that the influx of a lot of technology and artificial intelligence is actually going to force us to create more human organizations. Do you think that's true? And are you seeing that at all inside of Deloitte Consulting or with any of your clients?
I absolutely agree with that premise. And it's the humanity that then allows the technology to work in real life. The absence of humanity will drive irrational and illogical decisions, and will erode the sort of fabric of cultures of organizations. So we have to all love the efficiency and precision and beauty that technology offers in the way we run our businesses and the way we reach our customers. But the way we're describing it is the best organizations elevate the human experience, not just the customer experience, not just the employer experience, but we're going to elevate the human experience. And technology plays a big role in that, but never, ever, ever underestimate or try to substitute the humanity from the situation.
I love that you said that, because I would imagine, for example, when you try to close a deal, when you send a proposal, if you have a customer that's either really happy or really upset, they ultimately, it's the relationship, right? They want to interact with a person, not with, some sort of like a phone tree or a bot. So the business, at least for you guys, still very much runs on the relationships that you build with your customers.
It absolutely does. But the magic in advising a client is in figuring out which interactions the person does want to deal with a human and does want a relationship with that person, and which the most satisfying experience is a fully automated one. Look, I'm a much happier restaurant orderer in a fully automated way. And we did some work with Chipotle, for example, to transform their digital experience, and I'm a much happier Chipotle customer now because digital transformations allowed me to have a seamless experience there. And that's a great use of automation and technology that takes some of the previous human friction out of the interaction. But on so many other interactions, including the ones you describe in terms of us forming relationships with our key customers, the humanity is the essence of the success.
Shifting gears a little bit more towards you, because I get a lot of requests from people who want to know this from senior executives such as yourself. How do you spend your day? And do you have any certain routines that you practice either at work or at home?
There are things that I do every day. I exercise every day. I try to have a protein smoothie every day. I consume sports and news and business information from the outside world every day, online through Twitter, etc. So those things, and I am parenting every day. And if I'm traveling, I'm parenting via text message and FaceTime and other mechanisms. And when I'm home, I'm doing it in person and carpooling, etc. So those things are part of my everyday. Now, the dimensions of my workday vary widely. The best work day for me involves external interactions with clients and or sort of business partners. And for us, people like, large enterprise software companies that we form solutions with. So I get a taste of the external world. I have a taste of strategy. So I'm spending time with other senior, management leaders in our firm talking about the future. And then I get a taste of unbridled, unfiltered dialogue with people throughout my 56,000 person team so that I can create connections, not just through corporate hierarchy and the quote people that report to me, but through the true pulse of the organization. And so I, in most weeks, actually get all of that. And that's a thrill. If people want to know when that day starts, it starts sometime in the 4s to early 5s in the morning.
Wow, you're up early.
Up early every day, never with the benefit of an alarm.
So you just naturally wake up in the 4s?
I do, and I have no caffeine in my life either. So it's, for some reason, the energy reserve is well filled every day.
What time do you go to bed?
It depends. Sometime between 10 and 11:30 probably, though my family would probably tell you that, like on a Friday after a long week, you might find me, drooling on a couch at 6:30, not able to keep my eyes open.
It sounds like you're one of those people that when your eyes open in the morning, like you're in go mode. You don't like lounge around in bed for 45 minutes and like you're up and you're going.
Indeed.
Okay. I'm kind of the same way, although I'm not in the 4s yet. Maybe one day. Can you walk us through how you make tough choices? And do you have any examples of a recent tough or difficult choice that you had to make?
Well, in many ways, one of the gifts or curses, depending on how you look at it, in playing a role like I do, is you're making tough choices every day. And I think the best leaders understand the gravity and importance of those choices, but they don't agonize over them, because if you agonize over every choice, the accumulated stress on one individual is unsustainable. So how do I make choices? I try to gather information from a wide degree of perspectives on a spectrum of people who use data to drive choices on one end exclusively and instinct to drive choices on another end. I'm probably between the midpoint and the instinct side of the page. So there's always data that's present, but I'm pulsing other people that I trust about their perspective on a topic, and certainly giving that a lot of weight alongside the data in making choices. And some of the toughest choices that I make are people-oriented choices. And so you make choices about whether to hire someone or not, whether to exit someone from an organization or not, who to put in what role, how to give someone who otherwise is a brilliant performer a set of feedback that's going to put them on their heels a little bit. Those are the kinds of choices that that I see people really struggling to make, particularly when it means telling someone who you have a friendship with, a relationship with, or hold in high regard that you're choosing someone else to do a role, or you're choosing a different direction than they've recommended. And that's something I spend a lot of time thinking about.
Yeah, those don't sound like easy things to do. But it's not sort of like a step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 process. It's just kind of looking at the data and seeing where your instinct is and then going off of that? Or is it more like process centric for you?
Definitely not process centric.
Okay.
But the step 1, step 2, step 3 stuff is, it's happening. It's just not happening in a systematized way. So again, data is present. Perspectives gathered from a diverse set of individuals are present, but there's no, therefore, create a decision memo for Dan that incorporates this perspective and, outlines a pros cons analysis in 7 bullets or less for him to make a decision. That's not the way it works.
Okay, got it. And then how do you deal with, let's say you do make a tough choice or a decision and it ends up being the wrong one. And you made the wrong choice, you made a bad choice. How do you deal with that afterwards?
Well, first of all, a lot of these choices are not right or wrong. There are many shades of gray between perfection and total, something totally horrific. So the first thing I do is make sure that people are careful to not use vocabulary that is hyperbolic relative to, the implications of a choice. And when you do that, that means that you'll understand that perhaps if a choice is trending the wrong way, there are steps you can take to put the choice closer to where you'd envisioned. Now, when you do that, if you determine you made the wrong choice and that a reversal of the decision needs to be made, then not only do you have conviction to make the choice, but you do it in a way that demonstrates vulnerability by acknowledging that the choice that was made didn't turn out to be optimal for the organization. And then you allow lessons learned to be discussed and debated on the team about the choice, including indicating where your judgment as the leader was misplaced. And the power of the vulnerability that comes from those conversations and the benefit that can happen when an organization sees its leaders being vulnerable probably outweighs the cost of that single choice that didn't work out the way you intended.
I think just personally, I think being a leader of a company is probably one of the hardest, also one of the most rewarding, but one of the hardest things that anybody can do. And especially when you make tough choices that end up being wrong, do you have some way to deal with it? And again, this is relevant not just for leaders, but for everybody. When you make a mistake in your company, sometimes it's very easy to let that mistake sort of eat you up, and you get upset by it, you get depressed by it, and it sort of starts to consume you outside of work. Have you found any useful techniques or tactics during your career to help kind of keep that in a box so that it doesn't bring you down?
It's a great question, and I see my team struggling with that every day. And here's the technique that I used and that I ask all my people to use, which is I want you to think and believe in your mind that Deloitte likes you and wants you to be happy. And if you believe fundamentally, truly believe that Deloitte likes you and wants you to be happy, then when you make a single mistake, then you won't start to believe that Deloitte doesn't like you. Or when you want to go pursue something personally that's going to be at the expense of attending an important meeting or something, you won't make the choice to choose the professional over the personal because you actually believe that Deloitte wants you to be happy. And that very simple framework, when applied well, eliminates a lot of the mental gymnastics that people go through that create intense stress in their lives.
You also need to create that culture though, right? So I'm assuming that this is something you communicate with your teams, but do your leaders, those who report to you, but also run their own teams, is it something, I mean, I'm assuming they have to communicate this as well quite effectively, otherwise it doesn't work.
Of course. And communication is one thing. The demonstration that philosophy works is another. And so, anytime that someone sees that sort of equation that I just described not playing out in real life, puts me or any of the other senior leaders at risk of sort of being viewed as hypocritical. Yeah. And so it's really important. We talk not only about the culture that we aspire to, but we talk about the responsibility that all of our team has to uphold and deliver that culture. And when they see it not in action, that they have the right and frankly the responsibility to call people on it, whether they're calling me on it or they're calling their day-to-day supervisor on it. And that's the kind of culture we're trying to create.
Has anybody ever called you out on anything before?
Of course. And I love when it happens. I love when someone's disagreeing with me in a meeting. And I love when someone calls me out when I've done something or said something that sort of goes against what I've said. And, an example of that would be if, I said one time to a group of people, I'm going to, which I did, I don't know, 10 years ago, I'm going to cancel my vacation or leave my vacation with my family to go do X, Y, and Z. And, people push back and say, boy, I'm not sure X, Y, and Z rises to the level of importance that that you should be violating essentially what you've said, which is that, we need to make put the personal at highest priority. And so creating an environment where people are willing to call you on it, I think it's a beautiful thing.
So in other words, there's not a fear culture where somebody's like, I kind of want to say something to Dan, but I don't want him to fire me. Like it doesn't sound like that's the kind of environment that exists.
The exact opposite of that is what we're trying to create. I want fear and anxiety to leave the building, and I want arrogance never to enter.
And is this regardless of seniority level? Or is this like, I mean, let's say I was working at Deloitte Consulting and I've only been there for 6 months or a year. Does that same philosophy apply to everybody across the board?
Heck yeah. Everybody in our firm deserves the number one talent experience in our industry, because that's the ambition that we've established. And there's a certain set of commitments that we make to everybody. Whether you're here for 6 months or you're here for 20 years, whether you're working in a delivery center or you're at a client site, whether you're an engineer or an artist or a scientist, whether you're in India or Des Moines or Mexico or Washington, D.C., like there is a set of commitments that we are saying we are making to everybody, and that includes the responsibility and the permission to raise your hand when that experience isn't being fulfilled.
I really like your framework that you communicate to everybody, which is, assume that Deloitte wants you to be happy. How does that come to life? Because 56,000 people is a lot of people. So how does that manifest itself across the organization? How do you teach that or convey that so that everybody understands and believes it?
Well, I'm a very optimistic person, but I'll never use the word everybody to describe how 56,000 people feel about anything. I am a big believer that there's a phenomenon that I'd call the echo effect in large organizations, and highlighting and promoting bright spots where certain behaviors have happened and cascading them in interesting ways throughout the organization allow a greater percentage of people to hit the I believe button. And so we're very intentional about doing that. And then there's one other thing that we've done that is proving to be pretty powerful. And that's we've published a set of things that we're calling everyday equations. And we published them to all 56,000 people. And the concept of an everyday equation is saying, as you go through your day-to-day lives and you make choices about how you spend your time, you make choices about how you treat people, we want you to keep these equations in mind. And so I'll give you a couple examples. We want you to keep in mind that we think that 15 minutes of content and decisions is greater than 30 minutes of clutter. And what does that matter? That means that we're telling people, like, we don't want time being wasted for nothing. We want to give you back time. So if we're asking you to do something, it's going to be focused and important. And then we're going to give you 15 minutes back, and you use that for whatever you want. You go teach yourself something or take a training course. You go do yoga. You go have a client conversation. You go home and spend time with your family, but we want to give you time back. That's one example. A different equation that I love is horseshoes are greater than circles. What does that mean? Well, visualize a horseshoe. It's open and a circle's closed. What we're telling people is those of you who are creating cliques, that are creating closed environments that don't allow new voices and new perspectives to enter, we don't want you doing that. Having a little bit of an opening like a horseshoe to, while you create camaraderie in your team, there's always an opening for a new idea, a new person, a new diverse thought. That's what we want. And so these equations, and we have about 15 of them, are creating a really practical conversation about culture and how you apply it no matter where you are in the world.
Are these public by any chance?
No.
Oh, all right. Well, if you guys ever decide to share them, let me know. I think people would get a lot of usefulness out of that. But I loved some of the ones that you mentioned. Earlier, you mentioned stress. And from a lot of the leaders that I've talked to, it seems that leaders are under an increasing amount of stress just because pace of change, the spotlight that they're under, the decisions that they make have greater repercussions. Like, there's a lot of pressure on leaders nowadays. Is there anything that you do specifically to deal with stress or to practice self-care so that you make sure you show up every day to be your best self?
I hope I do that every day. I will tell you, I don't feel more stressed in my current role than I did 5 years ago or 10 years ago in other roles that I've played. And part of that is because of things we've already talked about. Part of it is I still am exercising every day, and that hasn't changed because I'm, quote, in more important or more senior jobs. I still find time for the hobbies that keep me energized. I've been the play-by-play announcer for the Georgetown University men's soccer team for the last 15 years. And
like currently still?
That means that in the fall, including this fall, when there's a game in Washington, D.C. at 2:30 on a Wednesday, I'm configuring my life and my schedule to be at that game. And people think, holy cow, how could you be doing that? Well, I'm doing it because I'm practicing what I preach, in that having a fulfilling life alongside the demands of the job is incredibly important. And not only does it give me energy and does it make me a happier and better person, but I hope, given the platform I have, it convinces more people that they can make their own version of that same choice and still have success professionally.
So you're still doing this currently, the announcing?
Absolutely. In fact,
wow.
in fact, Georgetown, just won their first ever national championship in Division I men's soccer in December. And so I can, no matter how well I do as a CEO, if I struggle in that role, I can always say I'm the voice of a national champion soccer team.
I like it. Do you ever feel like, and again, this is going back to this idea of this pace of change. Do you ever feel like you're just trying to keep up, like your head is barely above water? I mean, it seems like, just talking to you, you've done a very good job of just accepting that this new world that we're all a part of is the new world. And it sounds like you've also done a pretty good job of not feeling that you constantly need to stay ahead, that you constantly need to be working, that you I don't know how you figure that out, but I know that that is something a lot of people struggle, not just leaders, but just people in general, like with the pace of change. How are you not going crazy like so many other people out there?
Well, look, you said two things, that you constantly stay. How do you avoid constantly staying ahead and constantly working? I view those things as a little bit different. So do I feel pressure to stay ahead? Absolutely, I do. But I feel that pressure as an organization more than as an individual. So that means I've got to surround myself with great people who are advanced thinkers on topics ranging from, blockchain to artificial intelligence to quantum computing to the future of healthcare. But is it my job to be expert in all those things? Absolutely not. But as an organization, must we be? Absolutely. Because our profession, if we aren't at the vanguard of change, then our clients will turn to others to help them navigate that change. So I think if you configure the organization to make sure you're investing collective time in the future, then you take some of the pressure off individuals to embody a complete understanding of that future.
Very well said. And I think that's something probably a lot of people can relate to as well. What are some of the big trends that you're paying attention to now, just in the world of work, in the world of business? What's on your radar?
Well, I think, and not pandering to the audience and the title of the podcast, but I do think the future of work and all the implications of the intersection of automation and artificial intelligence with the future workplace and the future workforce is an incredibly important topic. So that's number one. And that's a centerpiece of most of the conversations I have with other CEOs. And then another that's at the centerpiece of most of the conversations I have with other CEOs is a conversation about responsibility, social responsibility, however you want to describe it. The the belief that I think we all have that the responsibility that business has to generate positive, social returns for society is really important, and that's complex in the fourth industrial revolution. Like those are two things that two trends that I think are going to be defining for this generation of executives.
And I remember, I think it was, what was it, earlier this year? What was it called? The Business Roundtable, where a collection of like 200 CEOs came to. Okay, so you know what I'm talking about, where they just said it's more than profits. It's about, pretty much what you said, making an impact to the world. I'm curious, why do you think that just happened now in 2019? Why is this sort of a new thing? Why didn't this happen in 2010? 2005? Is there something that's going on in the world today that's forcing organizations to say, hey, you know what? Maybe it's not just about profits and money.
So I think, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it's not that there weren't companies spending time on this topic. It's that it wasn't as consistent as it is today. What's different today? There is a powerful societal conversation about inequality on a number of different dimensions, and a powerful conversation about big social issues that the business community agrees are critical to address for the benefit of society in the long term, and a recognition that there's responsibility for it. And I'd say accountability, some of which is generated by new generations in the workplace who are asking their leaders really tough and really good questions about, are we doing enough to create, benefits beyond the profits we're creating? And I think, therefore, you have a generation of leaders that say, those are the right questions, and we can band together and do more.
That was actually going to be my next question for you, is what are you finding that your workforce is wanting and expecting? Both from you as a leader and also from Deloitte Consulting when they show up to work every day. And have you seen these demands or needs change over your 21 year time at the company?
Some of them have and some of them haven't. The evergreen things, the timeless things, our employees want relatable, authentic conversations in the organization. They want to understand that the things that are being shared with them are real, and that they can believe in the messages and the sentiment coming from their leaders. That's pretty timeless. Also pretty timeless, our people in the consulting industry want variety in learning and development. So that means they like the variety of experiences working across different industries, different technical skill sets, et cetera. And they want to sort of press fast forward on their own professional development by virtue of being in consulting. Excuse me. And so that's timeless. What's new is, I think, this topic of responsibility and the premium that our team places on making sure that the impact they're making is profound. The impact they're making on their individual client, i.e. that the things that they have helped them with have come to fruition in great benefits. And as I said earlier, the impact to the world around them that they're having by being part of our organization. That's evolved quite a bit.
How do you do that? Because this idea of purpose, of meaning, of impact is something that a lot of people want, but something that a lot of people also struggle with. So how do you help make sure that your leaders and that your people understand how the work they're doing is impacting customers, is impacting the world or society?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what we talk about is our role in the future of important issues. And so whether that's the future of healthcare, or if you're advising governments, the future of regulation, or if you're thinking about, autonomous vehicles, the future of mobility, or if you're thinking about urban communities in the US, the future of smart cities. And when you put things in the context of, as a consultant, whether you're doing it at a macro level or you're helping one particular customer, that we are playing a role in the positive future of those topics that are going to be shaping for our economy and society, that's pretty motivating. And it allows people to connect the thing they're doing on a day-to-day basis with something bigger.
It seems like part of that is also a little bit of storytelling.
No question. And the best consultants are often great storytellers. And those that say that the art of storytelling is perhaps fading in a technology-driven society, et cetera, I think there's something real about that.
Yeah. No, I mean, the storytelling piece is essential. Well, before I ask you just a couple of fun rapid fire questions, I know we only have a couple of minutes left. Maybe we can end the last serious question on what your greatest piece of advice would be for people listening who want to become better leaders.
Lean in to the topic of diversity and inclusion. It can sometimes feel unapproachable and intimidating, and you are worried you're going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. Lean into it. Be curious about the different people and the different cultures around you. Demonstrate that curiosity, and you will unlock a whole new set of conversations and a whole new set of learnings that are going to make you better. That's my first piece of advice. And the bonus piece of advice is there are graveyards full of indispensable people. And be very wary of making yourself so important to any particular situation that you prevent others from growing and sharing in the spotlight, and along the way, you prevent yourself from being available to pursue new and different opportunities because it's so difficult to extract yourself.
Interesting. And I suppose that's also a little bit contradictory to how most people view leaders, because I think for much of the modern business world, leaders were supposed to be indispensable. Like you can't get rid of them. The project will fail. The business will fail. But it sounds like what you're saying is the opposite. You should make yourself able to step away.
Absolutely. And I think the notion of servant leadership is a really important one, and is rooted in that principle. And I talked before, we try to prevent arrogance from coming into our organization. Well, part of that is people who put themselves above everyone else, and people who think that their indispensability is the pathway to personal success. Those people aren't going to last particularly long.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, now I have just a couple of fun rapid fire questions for you to wrap up. Starting off with, what has been your greatest business failure?
Well, what am I allowed to share? I'm under NDA.
I was just going to say, maybe if it's something specific, I don't know if you can speak in generalities or high level.
Yeah. My biggest business failure was the launch of a major transformative technology platform for a client that we celebrated in a very public way. And then a couple days later, when something happened that platform got a lot more traffic than it had ever received before, let's just say it did not perform very well. And the celebration turned into hey Dan, what the heck's going on here, in a pretty public way.
Okay, that's a good one. What's your most embarrassing moment?
I think I probably had one of those famous reply all moments, 10 years ago, where I wasn't thrilled with what all were able to see in my message.
Okay. What are you most proud of?
The culture that we've created that is beyond what one individual or one leader is all about.
What's your favorite business or non-business book?
My favorite non-business book is Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson.
Huh, I haven't heard of that one. I'll have to check it out. And last two questions for you. Who's the best mentor you've ever had?
My father.
And very last question for you, and I suspect I know the answer to this, but if you were doing a different career, what do you think you would have ended up doing?
Absolutely. Sports broadcasting. And there's still time left for me to do even more of that.
Okay, that was going to be my guess as well. So judging from some of your previous responses. Well, Dan, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your ideas. I certainly learned a lot. Where can people go to either learn more about some of your leadership philosophy or to connect with you or Deloitte? Anything you want to mention, please feel free to do so. Yeah,
sure. Well, people can join our organization. It's an awesome, fun place to have a career. But I'm at Helfrich, DHELFRICH 21 on Twitter.
Very cool. And you guys are hiring at Deloitte Consulting these days?
Of course.
All right. So people will be able to check out their career page, maybe even apply over there. Well, Dan, thanks again so much for taking time out of your day to chat with me.
Jacob, it's been fun.
And thanks everyone for tuning in. Again, my guest has been Dan Helfrich, the chairman and CEO of Deloitte Consulting, and I will see all of you next week. Thanks for tuning in to the Future of Work podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please do me a favor and rate and review the show on iTunes or whatever your preferred podcast platform is. And remember, if you want to take your education even further by getting access to courses based on some of the themes that I explore in this show, then check out futureofworkuniversity.com. If you're interested in being added to my newsletter, you can do that by visiting thefutureorganization.com/newsletter. And you can also get in touch with me directly if you have any inquiries for podcast sponsorships, working with me, or having me keynote your next event. My email is jacob@thefutureorganization.com. I will see you next week.